The case file opened with a world gone numb. Fields that once rang with laughter and markets that once traded fairly had turned mean, loud, and unsafe. Genesis states it without poetry. The earth was corrupt, filled with violence, and every intention of the human heart was only evil, all the time. It reads like an indictment, not of a single killer, but of an entire civilization. Bribes bought power. The strong preyed on the weak. Blood cried from the ground, and no one answered. If ever there was a story where the crime scene was the whole earth, this was it. In that wreckage stood one man who would not join the drift. Noah walked with God. He was a husband, a father, a man with calloused hands and a steady conscience. The message he received was both judgment and rescue. The corruption would be washed away, but a way of escape would be built before the rain fell. The instructions were precise: an ark 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, 30 cubits high, massive timbers, rooms stacked in levels, sealed with pitch inside and out. It would carry his wife, his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, their wives, and the life God meant to preserve. The work began under a sky that looked harmless. Neighbors wandered by to stare at the rising hull on dry ground. At first they joked about the old man with the boat. Then they jeered. Noah kept swinging the mallet. He cut beams, drove pegs, and smeared the seams with pitch until the boards gleamed black and tight. He stored grain and dried fruit, tied up bundles of fodder, and built troughs and cages. With every strike of the hammer, he preached the same sermon without words. Judgment is coming, and mercy is open to anyone who will step inside. Time passed, and patience held, but hearts did not change. The cities pushed deeper into violence. The strong men grew stronger, the poor more disposable. Noah's family learned to live with the noise, laughter at their expense, slurs thrown over the fence, rumors that the old man had finally lost his mind. Yet the ark climbed higher, a clean geometry against a broken age. It was a courtroom exhibit in the making, a vessel big enough to carry a family and a future, raised in plain sight while the world shrugged. Then came the animals. They did not arrive as a circus or a spectacle, but as an order. Pairs of every kind appeared at the edges of fields, cautious at first, then certain, moving toward the door. Birds wheeled and settled. Hooves clicked on the ramp. The clean animals came by sevens. Predators padded past sheep without lowering their heads. Neighbors watched with arms folded and chose, again, not to choose. The door remained open, the space inside wide enough for more than 8. 7 days before the storm, God told Noah to enter. The family crossed the threshold and stood in the dim cool of the great belly, listening to the groan of timbers and the shuffle of animals in their pens. Then the door closed. Scripture says God shut them in, final, solid, undeniable. The sky hardened. The first drop struck the dust and hissed. Then the fountains of the great deep burst, and the windows of heaven opened. Water climbed the streets as if the ground itself had turned against its tenants. Rain hammered the roof for 40 days and 40 nights. Outside, hills became islands, islands became swells, and swells became an unbroken plain. The people who had laughed ran for higher ground and found there was none high enough. Inside, Noah's household learned a new rhythm. They measured daylight by the color of the hatchway, counted hours by feedings, and told stories over the sound of rain. They prayed through fear and boredom, through the stench of animals and the ache of waiting, through the knowledge that every voice beyond those walls had gone quiet. The waters prevailed for 150 days. Mountains disappeared. The world went silent enough that the only sounds left were wind and water, the creak of the ark, and the breath of living things asleep in straw. It is hard to imagine the weight of that silence, the way it pressed on the chest and thinned the air. It was not only a storm survived, it was a planet reset. Then the text changes tense. God remembered Noah, not that he had forgotten, but that the time to act had come. A wind passed over the earth. Waters retreated into channels. The ark drifted until it grounded on the mountains of Ararat. No one rushed the door. They waited for the floor to steady and the waves to fall. Weeks later, Noah unlatched a window and sent out a raven that flew back and forth. He sent out a dove. It returned with empty beak and tired wings. After 7 days, he sent it again. It came back carrying a fresh olive leaf, proof the tops of trees were breathing air once more. A week later, he loosed the dove a 3rd time, and it did not return. Even then, Noah did not force the lock. He waited until the ground was truly dry, and God spoke again. When they finally stepped out, the air smelled new, green, and raw. The earth did not look like paradise. It looked like a crime scene after the tape comes down, cleared, scraped, sobered. Noah built an altar and offered sacrifice. God replied not with thunder, but with a promise. Never again would a flood erase all life. Seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night would continue. A bow would arc across the cloud ceiling as a sign that mercy had marked the sky. The covenant went further. Human life would now be guarded by law. Whoever shed human blood would answer for it, because people bear the image of God. In a story born out of violence, the judge wrote protections into the new order. The charge to be fruitful remained, but it was framed by restraint, dominion without cruelty, power without predation. The rainbow did not erase judgment. It set it beside mercy and held them together where everyone could see. What was the crime? Genesis names it. Corruption and violence so total that every thought bent toward harm. The verdict was not impulsive. The door of the ark stood open long enough for anyone to enter. But the empty space remained empty, and the rain began. That is the hardest detail to read. Salvation built in public, year after patient year, while a generation chose not to step inside. The flood is often told as myth or meteorology. Scripture tells it as moral history. The water is not the center of the story. The choices are. Noah did not survive because he was flawless. He survived because he listened. He believed the warning and built the refuge. He carried his family through the kind of obedience that looks foolish until it saves your life. When the bow bends across a clearing storm, it marks more than the end of rain. It marks the stubborn mercy of a God who remembers people by name, even when the headlines say the case is closed. We live far from Ararat, but the questions still circle like ravens. If judgment came quietly with blue sky overhead, would we mock the builder or help him lift the beam? If a door stood open, would we step through it while there was time? The flood of Noah's day is not a fable about water. It is a true account of a world that treated violence as normal until normal broke. It is a story of a judge who warned, a family that believed, and a sign in the clouds that says the world is on borrowed time and mercy is not an accident. Thank you for listening to Divine Crime. Subscribe for more true stories from the most dangerous book ever written.